like entrepreneurship, some of the things that you're doing now, was that in the deck of cards, or was that something that, like, was that assignment that you kind of uncovered within the ayahuasca space? Or I don't know. I don't even know how to answer the or ask the question, but I was just curious about that. I'm like, well, how did that come about? Was that always something you wanted to do, or has that unfolded because of your path with ayahuasca?
Yeah, I mean, really, all the interactions I've had with business and entrepreneurship has come through, my work with ayahuasca.
Yeah.
I needed a way to be able to support myself in the Amazon. And so
Yeah.
I started with tourism and jungle adventure tourism and stuff like that. And that naturally became Blue Morpho as a medicine center when people started hearing about the medicine experiences and deciding they wanted to do that instead of going on a trek, right? Then people
Mm,
started to go and have those experiences and they started to get healing.
yeah.
So people who were going to go on a trek also had depression and anxiety. And then they came out of the ceremonies and they didn't have depression and anxiety anymore. And they went home and they started telling people, and that started to, bring people down. And then writers started to come down and write about their experiences and stuff like that. And then we started to get global publicity. And that's kind of
Yeah.
how like the business side of it got started. Once that happened, then all of a sudden I found myself running a real business,
Yeah. Yeah.
which wasn't like also what I was learning. So I learned that on the fly. I found
Yeah.
mentors, I found coaches, I found people who could help me, were older than me because I was in my early 20s.
Yeah.
And so, I got the experience that way. And then what really grew out of Blue Morpho, which is really exciting, is the community, right? I didn't think when I first started that ultimately we would have people from all over the world. Like we've had people from over 100 countries,
Wow.
people from all over the states, from 48 to 50 states have been down, and they were from all walks of life. Many of them were entrepreneurs, CEOs, founders of companies. Others were musicians, others were tech people, coders, and they were into tech, and other people were finance people, and other guys were
Yeah.
historians and teachers and professors, and some people just had families and they were looking for ways to better themselves in their own personal life. It was like everything, right?
Hmm.
And we would get together and have these like unbelievably intimate groups where people would open up in a way that they never normally would and just share what was going on in their lives. And so I got to
Yeah.
learn about all the stuff that was going on in the world through the guests. And as that started to happen, like a core group of us started to think, like, we want to impact bigger problems in the world. Like we
Hmm.
want to impact like really big problems. Like we've done this amazing thing with the plant medicines and we got that going now on a global level. And that's making ripple effect and positive
Yeah.
change, for so many people. And we were a group of, I don't know how many people, but less than 100 people in the world at that time that got that going in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And so that was like a big movement that we were a part of help creating. And it was like, well, we want to create more movement. And we started to look at like, how do we do that? And so the first problem we decided to try to tackle was what we called the starving artist problem, which
Yeah.
were creators all around the world that are actually struggling to have enough money to be able to keep creating, when we thought that creativity and creation should generate income. Like it is
Absolutely.
its own
Yeah.
form of value and wealth that's being provided into the world. And so, we got scientists involved, mathematicians, physicists, finance guys, CEOs, founders, musicians, physical artists, digital artists. We got them all together and we started to, a think tank around like, how can we actually affect the starving artist problem? And as we looked at the different ways to go about that, we realized that the best way would be business. That
Hmm.
if you can just offer people a better way to make a living, then that will grow itself. It's not
Yeah.
an NGO where you have to like raise money through, fundraising, et cetera. Like you don't have to convince somebody why it's a good social mission. It's like,
Sure.
actually, this can just fit into the economy. It can fit in within regulation. It can support people around the world. And so that's what got us into
Yeah.
like, technology. And it was like, okay, how can we use technology to be able to do this? And then like at the time, this was 2016, 2017. That's right when the blockchain technologies were coming out in like a pretty big way. And so, we were looking at them as a form of technology and how we could implement it to be able to impact first the starving artists, and then another group of innovators and I got together and it was like, well, how can we impact this question around affordable housing? Like,
Yeah.
how can we
Hmm.
help people in housing? Like, everyone needs a house. Like everybody
Right.
needs
Yeah.
shelter. Like shelter is a primal thing that truly everybody around the world needs. And as the world expands, like a lot of the first world has figured out how to do shelter really well, but the developing world, which is where the majority of the population is ultimately going to be, expanding in the next 20, 30, 40 years,
Yeah.
doesn't have that like fully figured out yet, and that's
Yeah.
where I've spent my adult life living. And so I was like, okay, we need to impact housing, and how can we, ultimately impact housing? And so we got into a project around that. And then I got really interested in this idea that we were part of consumer economies. And so you have all this stuff, but now all your money that you worked so hard to make is now locked up in all this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what can we do about that? How can we ultimately help people, liberate some of the cash that they have locked up inside their stuff? And so that got us into finance. It got us into, real estate and housing, and it got us into art, creativity, media. And so I developed, these three projects in those realms, really looking just to how we could support people. And, at the
Wow.
beginning, it was one of those things where, you have a good idea and then you find out how hard it really is to develop these
Sure.
things in the world,
Totally.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's been a journey in its own right. But we're there. I mean, we've been in
Totally.
from the beginning to now has been 4 years.
Wow.
And in the last 2 years, we've actually been, coding the platforms, developing the platforms.
Wow.
And in the next 2 months, the platforms will be ready to go live. And it's an unbelievably exciting time.
It is. Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for taking us through that journey.